Looks like I'm in familiar territory. Don't worry, this isn't permanent, nor is it like even a living arrangement. Um, this familiar background comes as a result of the home that my mother is currently living in being in close proximity to the home my dad lives in. And so I go back and forth from here because actually moving all of the stuff that's in this room to that other one is going to take a long time, and so you see me here until I inevitably move to another state once again because I seem to make a habit out of that. Depending on when this was recorded, I could already be somewhere else, but um, I wanted to talk about trans issues again because I feel like I didn't really touch on it very well um, in the why I detransition video. I just sort of made like vaguely supportive statements whilst explaining my rationale for my own detransition and like how I hadn't, radically changed ideologically since then. But, you know, I've been thinking about something. I've been thinking about Narcissia Wright. I've been thinking about Chris Chan. I've been thinking about Trixie, all with all due respect to, probably my biggest, no doubt, I don't know why I say probably, my biggest inspiration on this platform, and one of the biggest in general. I think, you know, there's a problem with autogynephilia. There's a problem with people who come to identify as women, are ostensibly lesbians in this new identity, and didn't really have feelings of dysphoria throughout much of their life, merely jumped on the trans wagon because they felt, uh, attraction to themselves or attraction to the idea of being a woman. This isn't to discount the dysphoric feelings they feel, um, but it is to say that I think they emerge out of a unique set of circumstances that could perhaps be circumvented by um, a few changes. Changes that I don't think transition itself is necessarily apt to induce. Um, that these people, these people who suddenly feel very uncomfortable with themselves, who have a massive desire to reinvent themselves, should perhaps seek other means. I think really like there there have been a couple of bad influences in this whole discussion, primarily coming from the left, obviously. Not to say that the right is doing so much better on this issue. If anything, like the amount of browbeating and accosting of members of the community they've done have no doubt fueled this, radical change in the rhetoric. Because, when you try to take down a few of us, you end up inadvertently taking down all of us because rhetoric that provides critical support rather than full support ends up being, treated as inevitably as fuel for the transphobic masses. And, given the wave of like Nazi Germany-esque laws that are continually being passed with more and more radicalism in so many states in my country of origin, I can understand that discomfort towards discussing things like this. And it's part of why I haven't for the longest time. Um, I have to smoke just to do this video because I I think about the words that I'm using, and I realize that I have to um, say them with immense care. That because of the nature of this topic, um, this video has the chance to do real harm, and I would like to not do that by being as precise as I can. So, what exactly do I think of people like the individuals I mentioned? And why do I think that their struggles may, that's a key word there, be induced by the by these ideas being perpetuated, that like you're valid no matter what your individual relationship to gender is, and that anyone who, you know, questions whether or not you're trans, or whether or not transitioning is really the best option for you, is true scum, quote unquote, and should be, you know, disaffected from the movement or whatever. I think, you know, I think all of this all of this is getting away from the main point. Like, it is your autonomous right to consume whatever you would like to consume, as it is your own body. It is also your autonomous right to identify however you would like to identify. For example, I have continued to refer to Trixie as a she, and I've done the same for my old friend Plunder. But I've noticed something. I've noticed something happen with these people as they've gone through their transition. That being mass hysteria, insanity, and in one person's case, literal psychosis. And I think the reason this has happened is because of a distinct difference in the rhetoric and descriptions being used by these individuals that makes them distinct from the rest of the trans community, who we'll call HSTS, for, you know, just so everyone is on the same page. People who are primarily attracted to men, perhaps not entirely, but have transitioned because it just made sense with the behaviors that they've continually presented, and that new adaptation that they're making is literally them becoming a more accurate version of themselves, because it is in line with what they have consistently been. And like, I look at my friend Dotsmite, for example, as a good example of this. If we look at the way Dotsmite is, they are like, if you take themselves prior to transition to themselves now, it really is just a few tweaks around the edges to more accurately represent what was already there. Their name is literally just the name that people used to call them in school when they would act feminine, or present themselves in a feminine way, something that was just entirely natural for them. And so even down to like the slight change of their name, they're consistent. And I think this is interesting because if I look at like the various iterations of Trixie, and the struggles therein, the same with Christian, with Plunder, you notice a pretty distinct, not just rhetorical difference, but also behavioral difference, where they're going on and on about reinventing themselves, about this being a new, they're embarking on a new journey that, you know, the old way they've disavowed, and that they're attempting to reconcile that by constructing all of these new things. And there may be, you know, some mental gymnastics there, like trying to connect as much old information as possible that is compatible with the current self, but it's nonetheless out of line, out of lockstep with what had been known to be the case up to that point. And I think people generally are not made to undergo this process. I think this is also, to a lesser extent, but nonetheless, the case, what happened to me when I transitioned. If I look at how I behaved, and just how insane I went when I was on hormones, I feel like I can tie a lot of that to how uncomfortable I was with the fact that there were like boyish characteristics I couldn't present anymore, that there were ways I wanted to express myself that weren't entirely congruent with this ideal of femininity, and I was trying so hard to fit myself in that box, into these gender stereotypes, that I found myself kind of spiraling out and going mad, because human beings are not made to surveil every word and action that they do or speak. We're simply not made to do that. And so if you're putting yourself under constant surveillance, if you're constantly trying to reinvent, down to even the smallest things, who you are and how that presents itself, you're undertaking such a massive psychological weight that you will crumble beneath it. And I think that explains a lot of the weird things coming out of the trans, lesbian, or autogynephile, for as much as I hate that term and think it's kind of made up, community. It is helpful. I think this explains a lot of it. Like, why? Like, I feel like I've witnessed this so many times. I'm using public figures here to make my point, because they're the most relevant to the people watching the video, as in you can like look at the evidence in its totality and tell me if I'm like retarded or not. But I've seen this happen in friendships of mine, so many friendships of mine, where like the trans lesbian embarks on this journey of self-discovery and ends up leaving with a bunch of total fabrications that they're constantly trying to fit themselves within, and being psychologically crushed in pursuit of that. I've seen this so much. And like, if that's what people want to do, I have no right to tell you not to. And moreover, I have no right to tell you that my opinion is more correct than yours. I may think, in my own opinion, that it's more correct, but I don't really know that for sure, and so I may express that difference of opinion. But ultimately, all it can be is a suggestion. That's all it really is. Like, if anyone is going to have the most context on your experience, it's going to be you. But as to how we compartmentalize that context and what perspectives that we can look at it through, other people can be very useful, which is why I provide these suggestions. But it's under the pretext that I may not know myself, and so if these people truly believe that what they're doing is helping them, is making them feel better, who am I to say otherwise? I mean, I got this with me right here, and I'd say that this helps me out. There's going to be at least one comment of people saying that it's doing nothing but hurting me, you know? How is this any different? Like, I would be a hypocrite if I were to espouse anything otherwise, really. And so, my thoughts, as far as this autogynephilia stuff is concerned, is that there are some people there, and this could apply easily with people who are like only attracted to men as well. This is just something I especially notice with the transbian side. There are people who are not going to be entirely right about themselves. And I would recommend to those people to surround themselves with people who will be critical and support them in an ultimately critical way, but also have the other perspective there for what value that they can provide. Which is really a more neutral stance than I'm presenting with the title of this video. It's kind of scary. It is kind of scary, like the prospect of potentially permanent body modifications and like potentially alienating other people who you're close to as a result of these like wide-ranging changes in one's physiology and psychology. Like, it's a pretty fucking big decision to undergo. And I think perhaps the most important thing to consider prior to undergoing a decision like this is whether or not what you're doing is really, truly consistent with who you've been up to this point. Not to post hoc rationalize the change in identity or behavior. Like, if you want to identify as female for like a week or something, and you announce to all of your friends, oh, I'm going by she, her now, etc., just to see what it feels like, with an unbiased perspective going in, or at least trying to have as much of one as you can, go ahead. There's no shame in coming back to those people a week later and saying, hey, I'm socially detransitioning, this isn't actually what I want. But I feel like so many people get caught up in being consistent with themselves that they end up inventing all of these ways in which what they're doing is actually completely good and okay, and really it was the plan all along. And that kind of thinking, I think, leads these individuals or individuals like this down this kind of path. Because there's not a lot of evidence for some people to really be trans, but they nonetheless fixate on those little nuggets of evidence that they can kind of construe to their own ends, whilst omitting the entire, like, all of the other evidence that points to the contrary. It's like choosing to hear only what you want to hear. And I have to wonder, well, why do you want to hear that? And more often than not, I think it's to avoid shame or ridicule, or out of this desire to reinvent oneself. There seems to be some immense discomfort with who we are at the root of this. But real trans people also experience that. This is the danger here. And so these people will talk to trans people, and they'll hear, oh, I really am uncomfortable with myself too. You're just like me. And then they come to believe that they're just like each other, when really they're not. Sometimes there are other issues at the root of discomfort with oneself, dissociation from oneself, that are entirely independent of gender. And it's the failure to acknowledge this that I think is the cause for so-called gender confusion. That, like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, there's a lot of people out there who, if they continue closing themselves off, they're going to be in for a rude awakening. Or, if they never wake up, they're just going to suffer more and more, all under the vague belief that they're somehow feeling better. It's really sad when you think about it. I won't lie. There's a huge chance that, I'm wrong as well about what I believe helps me. I've been wrong about it before. What's stopping me from being wrong now? And I have to keep people around who think that I am wrong. Otherwise, I risk being just as closed off as these people. It's scary. All of this is very scary. I guess that was my video about autogynephilia.